Hello and welcome to the Bald and Bloviating Podcast. I am your host, Mookie Spitz, and I will be bloviating about my new novel, Jonnie, Fazoolie, and the Transfinite Reality Engine. Today's bloviation will focus on the chapter dedicated to the spider's jar. You can call them chapters. My book is divided into 6 episodes, and each episode has what you would call a chapter. I deliberately wanted to make my novel as readable and accessible and as fun as possible. There's a Hungarian writer who wrote very, very short stories, and he called them 8-minute stories, with the idea that you could finish each short story in 8 minutes or less. And I adopted a similar approach to my novel. Everyone is busy, running around. Our collective attention spans have reduced to near zero. Reading is hard, and people like to read in little chunks. Look at anything online. You're getting blurbs and summaries and bullet points. Axios.com blasts you with little tidbits, nuggets of news. We're all on the go. And we're in the digital age. The days of the 5, 6, 7-page paragraph of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest, I think, at least for the most part, are over. No disrespect to Mr. Wallace, but we ain't got time for that. There's also a sensibility associated with that kind of indulgence. There's also a whole branch of philosophy that's devoted to getting at the truth through that immersive type of writing and thinking. It's called the hermeneutic approach, practiced by philosophers such as Edmund Husserl, the phenomenology movement. And they were in fairly intense complementary opposition to the American pragmatists of John Dewey and his kind, who saw simplicity as the road to truth. End of every writer's day, it boils down to the predilections and preferences of the writer. There are as many types of writing and reading as there are writers and readers. So you pays your money and you makes your choice, as the MC of the circus used to say. So who am I to judge whether you want to indulge in Dostoevsky or read something quick on TMZ? In another podcast, I went into my philosophy, my methodology of writing in what could be considered short, controlled bursts that are like tweets, never longer than 200 characters, more than 35, 36, 37 words, until you get a break, a carriage return, an old school manual typewriters. But I digress. What I'm getting at today in this podcast, and as I will continue to do so over the next few pods, is annotate my own novel. People have been asking me about sections that come across as confusing or need some kind of additional exposition, one of which is the spider's jar. So I thought I would start this series of Jonnie Fazoolie whisperings with talking about the jar, how I thought of it, how it fits into the narrative, and other goodies. And I'll even read from my book. See how we feel about the writer reading his own writing. So let's give it a whirl. The origin of the spider's jar goes back to the wonderful genius writer Jorge Luis Borges from Argentina. He wrote poems about gauchos galloping on the Argentinian plains for years. Sentimental, romanticized, hyper-nationalistic poetry. And then the story goes that he was walking up or down, I'm not quite sure, a spiral staircase. And there was an open window on the wall of that staircase that was freshly painted. And it was an oil or lead-based paint that was used to paint the window frame. And Jorge was always nearsighted, and eventually he would become totally blind. But at this point, he was nearsighted and probably a little absent-minded, as many writers and thinkers are. And as he was walking up or down this staircase, he bumped into that open window and he nicked his eye or in some way cut himself on that freshly painted door frame, and he got poisoned by whatever was in that paint, lead or oil or who knows what. Shortly thereafter, he fell into a deep, deep fever. He was knocked out. His temperature rose to 101, 102, 103 Fahrenheit equivalent. He was in bed for days, maybe weeks, and he almost died. And while he was enduring that super high fever, he had visions and dreams. And when he finally awoke from his delirium, he wrote a short story called Jacques Minard, which essentially was a parody, or even better, a highly sophisticated satire of literary criticism. And he used as a launching pad the fairly ridiculous idea that a critic could only really understand the work of an artist by living the life of that artist. It's a variation of some of our identity politics that have been churning through the American zeitgeist for years. Less popular now, of course, in the age of Trump 2.0, but prevalent. And the essential premise from a political identity politics point of view was and remains, especially in left-leaning academic circles, that it's impossible to understand or even fully empathize with the life of a minority, especially a disenfranchised minority member of society, not being them. So for a white male heterosexual, that would make it impossible to even relate to, let alone understand the plight of a lesbian person of color. So that is the woke version of the literary criticism that Jorge Luis Borges was satirizing with the first short story he wrote after coming out of the delirium of his fever. Now, Borges' take on this was Jacques Minard was a scholar of Spanish literature and obsessed with Cervantes in general and Don Quixote in particular. So, with this attitude in mind, once again, that it's impossible to fully understand a literary genius without being that literary genius, again, akin to our politics of empathy being impossible without actuality, Borges' Jacques Minard decided to write Don Quixote from scratch by being Cervantes. It's actually a variation and perhaps even an inspiration for Being John Malkovich, if you remember that movie, that meta postmodern avant-garde movie. But I digress on this digression. Anyway, Jacques Minard sits on his ass and, in a sense, pretends he is Cervantes. And by doing so, his recreation or simulation of being Cervantes enables him to write Don Quixote word for word that matches completely with the original text. He doesn't copy it, but by transposing the essence of Cervantes, by channeling his genius, he writes Don Quixote. And one of the best passages in literature that I've ever read in my entire life is when Borges takes a short paragraph from Don Quixote, and it's Jacques Minard's Don Quixote. And then a few lines down, he shares the same paragraph written by Cervantes, the original. And they're identical paragraphs, word for word. And then Borges rolls his sleeves up and interprets the two paragraphs as completely different in their meaning. And why? Because Cervantes was writing in the 16th century, and Minard was writing in the 20th. Brilliant, brilliant stuff. But I digress. So Borges is poisoned. He goes into a fever after writing gaucho poems, comes out, and he's writing about metaphysics and philosophy and games of the mind. He's exploring the infinite. He's exploring human memory. And he writes a series of short stories that were collected in ficciones, which is, again, if I had 10 books, only 10 books that I could take to that proverbial desert island, ficciones would be one of them, without a doubt. Masterpieces, each and every one of those short stories. And one of them, you see what I did here? One of them is the Library of Babel. And in it, Borges takes head on with this idea, which is the essential dilemma faced by all writers. If you're a writer, you've endured this. If you're any kind of a creator, even in a business capacity, if you're making anything new, a presentation, thinking of a brand identity, messaging for a campaign, you're writing a damn instruction manual for a video cassette player. When you put pen to paper or finger to keyboard, you are not only battling the second law of thermodynamics, which is you are fighting against chaos by bringing order. The natural tendency of the universe is to gain a state of thermal equilibrium, which means random processes far outweigh non-random ones. It's mathematics, it's statistical. And when you're writing, you're not only grappling with this uphill battle against nature herself, but you're battling the math of the finitude of ideas themselves. If you look at a keyboard, there's 26 letters in the English alphabet. And as you're typing away, you realize there's only a certain number of combinations of keystrokes. And you're also coming under the realization that thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of books have been written before yours. Write a word on a page, and it's been written before. Write a page, and that page has probably been written in some variation. How many kinds of stories are there? There's the hero story, the hero's journey. There's the quest for the pot of gold. These have been analyzed. There could be 8 different kinds of stories, or 10, depending on your analysis. But the point is, the human mind is simple in the sense of engaging with and remembering and responding emotionally to a limited set of information. That's the essence of marketing and branding. Your brand stands out because it's memorable and different, and it can only do it in a way that has a few attributes that stand out. Human beings have limited bandwidth. Look at Noam Chomsky with his analysis of language. So many differences in terms of apparent grammatical structure, lexicon, accent. But when Chomsky analyzed them and deconstructed all the languages on the planet, he realized that there were only a handful of key structures, and all of them obeyed what could be considered the DNA of linguistics. And the same rules apply for creativity, that when a writer writes, there's the feeling of redundancy. And that's a terrible feeling, especially when you're a young writer, that you're just regurgitating shit that you've already read. And there's nothing that you can do to stand out. But that's an illusion. And I'll get to that later. But Borges himself struggled with that. This guy describes himself just lying in bed from the second he got home from work at a library and read and read and read and read. This guy read everything, all the classics, contemporary literature. Arguably, there's no writer perhaps next to Jean Genet, who was imprisoned for much of his life and read everything because there was nothing else to do, than Borges. And Borges read so much and was so familiar with literature, with history, with the entire canon of human knowledge, that it asphyxiated him as a creative writer because he felt that every word, every story had already been written and told. So, what did he do after he got poisoned by the window frame? And he had that biochemical and spiritual state change that resulted in Jacques Menard and Ficciones and the Library of Babel. And the Library of Babel as a theme is exactly what I've been describing right now, which is a transposition of Borges' own frustration that writing is just a combining and recombining of symbols on a page. And he considered, what are the implications of that? What does it mean if everything that has been written is being written now? And here's the thing, will ever be written is merely a mathematical and probabilistic redistribution of a handful of symbols on a piece of paper. And now, if you're familiar with some of the postmodern philosophy, a lot of which, if you ask me, has went off the rails, like Jacques Derrida and the deconstructionists, all of that nonsense that writing is literally just that. But you can source this sensibility to the common thread of what Borges, the genius, the bibliophile, the librarian, was grappling with when he wrote this story, The Library of Babel. And what he did in this story is fascinating. He imagined a library consisting of hexagonal rooms, and each room had a book. And by a book, I mean endless, nearly endless books. But each book was more or less following the exact same template. And scholars have been wondering why he picked these numbers. But I think he just felt that they were cool. I'm not sure if there's any meaning, but maybe there is because he read everything. But imagine a book, and there are 25 available symbols in the language that the books are written. 25 symbols, including the space and punctuation. So there's 25 symbols. There are 80 characters on each line. There are 40 lines on each page. And there's 410 pages in each book. Now, what is the Library of Babel? The Library of Babel consists of every possible book that could be written, consisting of 25 different symbols, 80 symbols on a line, 40 lines on a page, 410 pages in a book. And as Borges writes, the rules of the library is that there is one of each. So imagine one book is the equivalent of A for the entire book. Another book in the library is A for the entire book. And mathematically, it's not difficult to calculate how many possible books there are. The number is 25. That's how many possible symbols are used to the 1,310th power. Because if you multiply 80 symbols times 40 lines times 410 pages, you're going to wind up with 1,310,000 or so symbols in a book. And since you have 25 different ones, the total number of books is 25 to the 1,310,000th power. You have 25 possibilities in the first position, 25 in the second, 25 in the third, 25 in the fourth, and you have 1,300,000 in each book. Now, 25 to the 1.3 millionth power is mathematically equivalent to 10, which we're more comfortable and familiar with, 10 to the 1.85 millionth power. Now, I can say that out loud without too much stress to the muscles in my face, but the proverbial basis of comparison is the number of particles in the observable universe, which is 10 to the, wait for it, 80th power. So if every particle in our universe had a universe within it, and you extended this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 times, you might be able to accommodate each of the books in Borges' library. The analogy is of the infinite monkeys typing Hamlet. The question is, how many monkeys would you need, and how long would they have to type randomly for Hamlet to come out? And it's a similarly egregiously large number because Hamlet is a 5, 6, 7 hour long play. So good luck with that. But here's what's most interesting about Jorge's Library of Babel. Mind-blowing implication number 1. Within Borges' library, in written form, is every book that has been written, is being written now, and will be written. But it goes beyond that. Since writing is representative of emotional states, descriptions of the things, within Borges' library is your biography in microscopic detail, second to second, everything that has ever happened to you, everything that's happening to you now, and everything that will ever happen to you. But it goes beyond that. It's not only your life, but everyone's life. It's not only everyone's life, but every possible person's life ever. Do you see where I'm going with this? And do you see where Borges went with it? The mind-blowing implication, level 2 of the Borges Library of Babel, is that every idea, every description of reality, including the imagined and false ones, are not only in this library, but they are finite. There's a limit. Think about that. The library is unimaginably large to the point where I repeat, if each book would be a subatomic particle in our universe, you could pack all the books into our universe 6 times over. I did a calculation on ChatGPT, which, by the way, is an amazing calculating machine, essentially putting Stephen Wolfram's Mathematica out of business, it looks like. But I ran a calculation that if you shoved all of Borges' books into a black hole, that black hole would be 10 to the 999,999 meters across. So it would be mind-bogglingly big, and it would be a black hole, compressed matter. That's how big this library is. But that doesn't matter because that pales in comparison to the infinite. That's the point. And I'm getting to my book. Thank you for your patience. The implications of Borges Library is that if the universe as we know it is truly infinitely large, or our universe is one of an infinite number of universes, there's a finite number of ideas and things. And here's the thing, even possibilities. Why? Because they could be captured in one of Borges' books. And Borges' library exhausts every possible book, which means that it exhausts every possible idea, every possible life, every dream ever dreamt, every dream being dreamed, and every dream that will ever be dreamed is somewhere in that library. So Borges, genius that he is, goes one step further than that. He imagines priests who roam those hexagonal rooms in the Borges library, and they're going insane because they know somewhere in the library is the accurate depiction of their death. Somewhere else in that library is the true nature of God. Somewhere in that library is the essence of mathematics, philosophy. Quoting Douglas Adams, inside Borges' library is the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. And they're going nuts. Now, when I read this, my mind was blown. And I thought that Borges, thinking about this, the finite nature of reality and the implicit conclusion that within an infinite universe, there has to be eternal recurrence because the universe runs out of stuff. There's only a finite number of books. There's only a finite number of ideas and things and experiences. So if the universe goes forever, it's got to repeat over and over and over again. Coupled with this idea that all the secrets, all the lies, mostly lies, are in the library, but every truth, the essence of the nature of the universe or universes of existence itself, is in that library. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. The fact that it's physically inconceivable in terms of its size, as I've just described, doesn't really matter. Why? Because it pales in comparison to the infinite. That's the thing. Because if you're thinking about life, the universe, and everything, it's really hard not to think about the infinite. Because if the universe or the multiverse or the whatever verse is bounded, then what the actual fuck is on the other side? We're talking about everything, right? Everything. And if you're talking about everything, it's way more difficult and intellectually and philosophically and even emotionally challenging to conceive of everything having a limit. A limit vis-a-vis what? There's an edge to the universe. Well, then what's on the other side? That's as big a cop-out as believing in God. And it's essentially the same thing as believing in God. Because that's what believing in God, in a sense, is. Rather than imagine an infinite universe or reality, unbounded, going forever, you imagine some entity or thing that's finite. You can say and you can pray and you can believe that this God entity would be there forever. And you can even say that space and time are not absolute. But come on! That's so disingenuous. That's such a philosophical and even moral cheap shot. Because all conversation stops at that point. God made it. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Well, it begs the question of God, doesn't it? That's pretty sophomoric. But when you're talking about the infinite and you're talking about reality, capital R, you automatically talk about the infinite. And if you're talking about the infinite through the lens of things and ideas and possibilities, then Borges Library is badass. It's a gorgeous, poetic, philosophical model. All these ideas with absolutely mind-blowing implications like I've been describing. So what about that novel, Mookie? Well, you always need to one up. Newton said he stood on the shoulders of giants. And Einstein said that he wouldn't have done shit without Lorentz transformations. Minkowski, his contemporary, helped him with general relativity. And I will be so bold that my spider's jar came into being with the help of two things. The one is Borges Library, which just etched itself into my mind and my heart like nothing else. And digital technology. So let me take the spider's jar to the next step after telling you about Borges Library. You can understand the spider's jar by understanding Borges Library and our smartphones. And here's how. I have a friend, Kim, and she is a Facebook friend. And she posted a few years ago, I think it was during the pandemic when we're all pretty much home and we're on our phones. And there was a general feeling of malaise. We couldn't get out. We were stuck. And we were all very introspective. I have a very introspective side. And even folks who are extroverted got introspective. And some people freaked out and had a horrible time. And other people, air quote, had a good pandemic because for the first time in their lives, they got to explore themselves a little bit, maybe calm down and not rely on others for their opinion and energy. But anyway, we're home. It's the pandemic. And Kim posts a picture of flowers on her porch. And there's a caption. The caption says something like, "Look at how gorgeous these are. These flowers are like human creativity, infinite in possibility." Something like that. And she's not really one to wax poetic or philosophical, but it's the pandemic, and she took a picture of her flowers, and this was her observation. Now, I saw that, and I thought of Borges Library, and this idea of the finitude and limit of human knowledge and human experience, and de facto human creativity. It's not just what's real, but it's what's imagined too. And I started thinking of something. And what I thought about was the image, the JPEG that she had shared was a photo that she took on her smartphone of these flowers. And then I thought of something. Let's pretend, for the sake of simplicity, that her camera was 10 megapixels. The resolution of these cameras and their lenses and the digital technology is in megapixels, and recently it's become gigapixels, 1,000 megabytes. But let's, for the sake of this illustration of my thinking, let's keep it really simple. Let's pretend Kim's camera was a 10 megapixel camera, and that each pixel had only 10 colors. Now, this is exponentially lower than the actual number, because actually, I believe it's 6 million different color shades are possible. But I just want to keep this simple. 10 colors in each pixel, 10 million pixels create the image of the flowers. Remembers Borges Library with the 80 characters on a line and 40 lines on a page and 410 pages in a book? And remember, there's 25 possible symbols. So do the math. If there are 10 to the 1.85 million possible books in Borges Library, how many possible photos are on Kim's camera? Do you see what I'm doing here? Well, it's easy. You don't need to be, a math geek here. It is 10 to the 10 millionth power. Now that's crazy, mind-blowing, absurdly frickin-normous. It's exponentially even bigger than Borges Library, but here's the thing. Here's where I took it one step further than Borges, thanks to the technology. Borges was talking about books, and books are symbolic representations of things and ideas and feelings, and just about anything depending on the skill of the writer or reader. But an image, a picture, is a visual representation of a thing, of an idea, of a feeling. Do you see what I'm doing here? We're going from symbols on a page representing things and ideas to the things and ideas seen with our own eyes. It's what computer programmers call instantiation. Instantiation means that you take computer code. Let's say you code the color red, and then red pops up on your TV monitor. The code has been instantiated into the color frickin' red that you see with your own eyes. The symbols, this is very important. The symbols become the thing. When you take a picture of Kim's flowers. So, by analogy, pretend you have a library of every possible picture that can be created by Kim's camera. It will have, in this simplistic, simplified calculation, far lower than the actual numbers, but just for the sake of illustration, 10 to the 10 million pictures are in this inconceivably vast library of all the possible photos on Kim's camera. Now, what does this mean? Instead of it being a bunch of books about people's lives, it's people's lives. The first person point of view of, get this is the point I'm getting at here. This blows my mind even talking about this. Captured within Kim's library of 10 to the 10 million photos is every life that has ever been lived, because each photo is an image, and you can do 24 frames a second to make a movie, and you could rearrange those 10 to the 10 million photos in any which way you want. Inside Kim's library is every life, the point of view and experience of every life that has ever been lived, every life that is being lived now, and every life which will ever be lived in the future as seen through images. If you made a movie of everyone's frickin' life, they're all in Kim's library. And we're talking about every possible life, too. Lives that have yet been lived. And if the universe went on forever and the human race never went extinct, then it would run out of lives to live. Now, you might think I'm batshit crazy for even thinking that this is meaningful, because 10 to the 10 million is such a huge number that we're looking at a black hole millions of orders of magnitude bigger than the black hole that was inconceivably huge that contained Borges Library. But that's not the point. The point is that if you consider reality infinite, and I can't help but, then even human experience and lives lived are finite and exhaustive and exhausting and exhausted. And remember Friedrich Nietzsche with his eternal recurrence? He never thought of this shit, but he felt it. But all of this is coming out with this idea of the Borges Library, infinite, not infinite, but every permutation is played out in the books. Kim's camera, every permutation is played out. And thank you for your patience if you've been listening this far. Mookie's spider's jar. This is the context for the spider's jar. Ready? I thought to myself, why stop there? With numbers this big, adding orders of magnitude isn't going to make all that much difference. And the impact in terms of your mind being blown is going to be so much more intense and satisfying. So you probably see where I'm going with this. Step 1, Borges Library, books that represent ideas and things, real and imagined. Step 2, Kim's Camera Library, her library of photographs that contain every possible image that could ever be taken, was taken, is being taken, will ever be taken. Mookie Spider's jar. Every slice of possible reality. Let it sink in. Same mechanism, same rules apply. Within the spider's jar, and as I describe it, it's a cylinder, because it's a jar, get it? 10 meters, I just picked 10 meters. Why the fuck not? What other number am I going to pick? 42 for Douglas Adams? 10 meters, about 30 feet tall, by 10 meters across. It's a cylinder. And it's plugged into some mind-blowing supercomputer. And within the jar, there are pixels akin to the pixels within Kim's smartphone. Only instead of pixels arranged in a two-dimensional sheet, it's three-dimensional volume. And instead of there being 10 colors for each pixel, each of Mookie's spider's jar, three-dimensional pixels, are the smallest possible measurable unit of space and time, which is called a Planck length. You could call it a Planck cube. It's the amount of time that light traveling at 186,282 miles per second travels through space from one end of that little tiny cube to the other in what would be a Planck second that is possible to even be theoretically measured given the physical constants of our universe. And that cube, that pixel, is unbelievably tiny. And there are, and I ran the calculations, 3 times 10 to the 107, if I remember, That's a 10 with a 107 zeros, pixels in the cylinder. And each one is either on or off, like computer code. And they are programmed by the computer. And the number of possible states within the spider's jar, I did that calculation too, is 10 to the 10 to the 106, which means there are 100, that's 10 to the 106, that's a 10 with 106 zeros, number of zeros past the 1. So, if the number of books in Borges Library blew your mind and was inconceivable to even imagine, and the number of photos in Kim's camera is even more so, then the number of Planck pixels in the spider's jar is that much more fucking enormous. But remember, you got to do this from the distance. Remember, from far away, from infinitely far away, that number is absolute chicken shit compared to infinity. It's not even scratching the surface. So what does this mean? As I describe in the story, the spider's jar is able to simulate, or, as I say, instantiate the code becoming real or representative of reality, everything possible, physically possible, everything that has ever happened in three-dimensional space and time, everything that is happening now in space and time. And here is the mind-blowing extrapolation. Everything that can ever happen in the future all exist in their potential state, programmable and finite, within the spider's jar. I think, in all my humbleness, that Jorge Luis Borges himself, who was not privy to digital technology and computers really, never really thought about their implications, would shit his pants thinking about the spider's jar. Because Jorge sat there and he read, and books were as real as reality to somebody who just lied in bed and loved to read and all the ideas flowing around. Books were his lovers. Books were more real than reality, I think, for Jorge. But this idea that not just books, every permutation of every book, but every permutation of reality itself could be in a device like this, ojalá que sí. That's what Jorge would say. And you know what? I thought about this after writing my spider's jar. He wrote another story called Funes the Memorious, or some variation of memory. And this was a peasant boy who I believe was also blind, who sat in a hut and he remembered every instant of his entire life. He had not only a photographic memory of things, but a photographic memory of everything. He remembered how he felt. He remembered the smell that was in the air. He had a complete memory across every physical and emotional and cognitive sensation that he has experienced in his entire life in his brain. And you could say to Funes, like, August 3rd, 1923, and Funes would tell you not only that it was a rainy afternoon, but he would talk about the smell of the lilacs and the shadow on a church and the empanada that he ate. I talk about this idea of blending sensations in my novel also. And I have a character who does not have this photographic memory, but he's a full-born synesthete. And he combines all of his sensations and juxtaposes them so that he will touch something warm and feel jealousy, and he will imagine the number 2 and see red. And Funes is like that in a cognitive and emotional kind of way. And you see, I think, and I haven't read anything like this before, I think Funes, in ways, is Borges anticipating something like my spider's jar. Because you have a human who not only experiences every permutation, if you will, of their own being, but is this vast library of all things and all feelings. It goes beyond just words on a page. It takes it to a multimodal level. And that's what I tried to do in the book. Creo Bonsai's jar is the ultimate simulator, to the point where you can't even imagine anything more sophisticated than that along the trajectory of this kind of imagination and thinking. We've gone from books to images to movies, because you could rearrange the images into a movie, to the totality of reality in every permutation. And now, within my book, I go beyond that. It's not just a short story about what I've described, but the spider's jar is central to the plot of my novel, because the spider's jar gets hacked, and there's a viral construct that appears within the spider's jar, which is central to the narrative of my story. Borges was awesome, but he never wrote a novel with these ideas. He shared an idea like the Library of Babel, but you don't get to know the librarians. They're shadowy figures obsessing over possibility and mortality. But I thought that I could take that essential idea and ladder it up and out, not only layering increasing dimensionality and sophistication to the idea itself, this idea of vast but finite possibilities within an infinite universe, but make that machine that does it. Transform the library not as just an idea to ruminate over, but an essential plot device that the characters in the story rally around, through which the drama is created. Isn't that kind of badass? If you've been tracking me so far, maybe you're as excited as I am in retelling my thinking about this, because this shit is cool. Because what this ultimately suggests, philosophically, scientifically, is the following. And I'll cap it with this summary. We likely exist within a capital R reality that is infinite. Space and time are likely not absolute, but I, for one, can't imagine any kind of limitation placed on reality itself, because that would imply that there's a boundary. And if there's a boundary, there's de facto got to be something, air quote, on the other side. If you're here, you're not there. And I'm not talking about space and time. I'm talking about a Hegelian style of isness. That's number one. Number two, if that's the case, based on Borges Library and Kim's photo gallery and Mookie Spitz jar, then this capital R reality runs out of stuff. Not only do we get a sense that every possibility has a chance and therefore likely does play itself out, but it does so infinitely many times with infinite variation, repeating over and over and over again, echoing through the instantaneous eternity that seems to be the foundation of reality itself. Now, as Jonnie Fazoolie in my novel would say, bong hit. Whenever there's a big idea he can't handle, he says bong hit. And when he says it a few times, he actually has to do a bong hit, because this is the shit of college dorm room conversation. But I think beyond just fanciful speculation, this is awesome. Awesome. This is the stuff of science fiction. This is the good stuff. Who gives a shit what's going on station number 86, or whether or not the aliens are going to take over the diamond mine on the asteroid? I mean, who really gives a fuck in comparison? I'm getting at the heart of reality itself and the nature of our place in not just the universe, but every fucking thing, through the lens of this idea that there's physical law and there's discrete things and consistency, and the sun comes up and goes down, and we have evolved over the course of what seems like billions of years within a deterministic yet unpredictable, chaotic universe. And by want of our capacity to understand these simple things, even though we can't experimentally prove all of this goofy stuff I'm talking about, everything that I'm talking about lies really at the heart of philosophy, speculative science, and mathematics. Because set theory, as of the latter half of the 19th century, got into this nature of transfinite reality, which is the stuff of yet another podcast. But do you see what I did there? The portion of my novel where I talk about Creole Bonsai, the spider and his jar, is the next logical extension of Borges Library and its concept of finite but vast possibility within an infinite universe and its mind-blowing implications. So to be continued. I hope you followed. I hope you enjoyed. If you have questions, let me know. I love bloviating. You might think that I hit the point home too often or not enough, that the section in the novel is more than enough to understand and appreciate, or it doesn't even scratch the surface. What the actual hell am I talking about? But if nothing else, it sounds cool. And as I'm saying, the bad guy in the novel, the one wreaking havoc throughout the infiniverse, the one seeking love, not only in all the wrong places, but all the places. The lover's guide to the infiniverse is, of course, contained within the jar, along with everything else. And to me, one of the most poignant moments in my novel is how I describe the spider coming to the realization that within the jar, because it contains everything possible and even everything hoped for and imagined, he realizes that his true love is in there too. How can he find her among the multitudes? And then once he finds her, how can he keep her, possess her, when she is just a fleeting chimera of Planck pixels generated by this vast quantum computer for the sake of science? So with that hour or so exposition, I always like to do things hot and heavy. I had a colleague back in the agency world years ago, and he said I was always fascinating and always overwrought. So that might help also explain why I took such a Twitter-esque approach to my prose, short, controlled bursts of ideas just to rein myself in. But anyway, now that I've given background as to the idea and philosophy and methodology and technique of the spider's jar in my novel, I thought I'd read the section in my novel that introduces the spider's jar. And now that you have all that background, it should be delightfully self-evident what's going on here. And it should add to the pastiche of the themes and the ideas and narrative of the book itself. So I am starting on page 152 of Jonnie, Fazoolie and the Transfinite Reality Engine. And it is the beginning of episode 3, which I called The Band. And you'll notice that each of the episodes are, of course, alliterative. They all start with B. And maybe that was my hat tip to Lewis Carroll's book, little book of rhymes. It was a rhyme story, kind of novella in length, at least for a rhymed couplet kind of story. The Hunting of the Snark. I bet you've never heard of that story. Check it out. The Hunting of the Snark is an absolutely delightful rhyming story. And each of the sections, if I remember, in The Hunting of the Snark, started with a B. And all the main characters, the butcher, the baker, they all started with a B. So I think I had that in my head. And I started with the bet. And then I had the brand. And as the book got longer, I broke it up into more sections. And since I had the bet and the brand, I thought I would add the band and the boilerplate and the blowout to rock it with the bees. So anyway, episode 3 is the band. And as you'll see, that's it's a multi-pun of the band, group of people, and a physical band and other goodies. So anyway, episode 3, the band, page 152, and I begin, as I do with all the episodes, with a quote. And this is from Sir Thomas Beecham. There are 2 golden rules for an orchestra: start together and finish together. The public doesn't give a damn what goes on in between. And I love that quote for a number of different reasons. I remember George Lucas of Star Wars fame, that the audience doesn't give a shit about your movie aside from the first 5 minutes and the last 20. And there you have it. Meaning for my book is multifaceted. I don't want to give out too many spoilers, but it's not about making an interesting opening and close in so much as what ties people together and what brings unlikely souls like Jonnie and Dr. Casey together. But I digress, and I'll leave that for another pod where I talk about them. But now I'm talking about the spider and his jar. And this chapter or little section is called Hating Mondays. Her signal is compressed and encoded, broadcast to destinations so vast in extension and duration that their units of measure are arbitrary. Her brash demands arrive the instant she sends them. To some observers, her message is a beacon, directing them to a source of wisdom and enlightenment. To others, the encrypted code is an alarm or warning, harbinger of destruction and death. To Creo Bonsai, designer and custodian of the jar, the code is an errant virus that has broken into a system, overridden controls, and generated a looping construct that has alerted the agency. Up to now, they have left Creo mostly alone. His problem instead the annoying scientists and their research queries, his relentless peers eager to conduct novel experiments within his machine. Also irritating are the adventurers and bon vivants who assume his device can manufacture whatever their greedy hearts and fat stacks desire, ignorant of how his device actually works. Requests are hurled at him for processing and simulation time. The queue for these queries light years long, replete with everything from designing new universes to testing time itself. They arrive without interruption from this universe and other inhabited ones. A minuscule subset, yet still infinite in number, uncountable in order, annoying him, but justifying his laziness. Fittingly, queries emerge through an archaic contraption. Glass tubes arced along the top, dyed bubbles in the dichloromethane flowing upwards, side columns glowing red, white, and black. With no way to catch up, Creo resigns himself to responding at his leisure, mostly not at all. Strung up and out in his web, hours are spent snoozing and dreaming above his cherished device. Below him spins the jar, a scintillating cylinder precisely 10 meters in diameter and height, suspended within an inertial field and near perfect vacuum, protected by a 0-point envelope. The jar has a lid sealed with a rubber band, and inside contains 1.86 times 10 to the 107th Planck pixels, each holding a binary value, calculated and assigned by the facility's zettaQubit computer. Creo's engine is thereby able to physically generate, within its 785 cubic meter volume, every combination of anything real and magnitudes more combinations of anything imaginable. The total number of real and imaginable things the jar can generate is mind-blowing in size at 2 to the Planck pixel power, a number that's about 10 to the 3 times 10 to the 106 digits in length. Huge, yet finite and programmable. Coding pixels with precision, the machine can generate past, present, and future slivers, not only of this universe, but every possible universe having any fundamental parameter values. Rogue scientists and bold philosophers speculate the jar can even render fleeting objects beyond the constraints of these physical constants. But the last thing Creo wants is more work. So let me take a second to annotate this just a bit through the lens of what I was yabbering on about earlier. The episode starts, yes, on a Monday, and a signal, a compressed and encoded quantum signal, has come in. You, the reader, don't know from whom or where, but I'm intimating that this signal has been broadcast everywhere and simultaneously. This is another hat tip, either consciously or unconsciously, to Douglas Adams, I believe. I think in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's a broadcast from the Vogon construction fleet that comes on every single electronic device on Earth, announcing that they're about to plow under the planet. So the signal from the Vogons come on your transistor radio, on your TV. This is also a science fiction trope. You get this a lot, that there's some huge signal that comes in from aliens, from some source, and it's on every electronic device. I think it might also have been in the in one of the Independence Day movies. I don't really remember, but this is again a science fiction cliche, but I do fun things with it. So there's a signal, it's compressed and encoded, and when its duration is beyond units of measure and arbitrary, then you know, and it arrives the second it's sent, it's a quantum signal. It's like an entangled signal. It's faster than the speed of light. It's instantaneous, and it's contains a demand. Her brash demands. Whose is that? Well, we don't know yet. To some observers, it's a beacon, enlightenment, wisdom. To others, a harbinger of death. People are suspicious about it because it's come from nowhere. It appears everywhere, and it's a mystery. To Creole bonsai, it's a pain in the ass. So who is this Creole guy? Well, he's the designer and custodian of this device that gets described. Creo is Greek for creator, and bonsai is like the bonsai Japanese plants, which are miniature representations or simulations or instantiations, if you will, of the bigger trees and plants that they're based on. And they're made by countless pruning. They prune the big trees and they self-select in kind of a reverse Darwinian way to breed these tiny, tiny versions of the big thing meticulously. It's very Japanese, and the Japanese love their little rock gardens and all that. So the bonsai is very much a Japanese phenomena. I was always fascinated by them, and my father used to collect them. But I thought the name Creole bonsai sounded kind of cool, if a little bit too science fiction-y, like Buckaroo bonsai, but I didn't care. The name Creole bonsai was just too cool. Started as a kind of a placeholder, and then I thought, wow, that's a cool name. I'll just keep it. So he's the creator of the simulation in name and in spirit and in practice. And this signal that has been broadcast everywhere simultaneously hasn't just been a passive vibration in a speaker, but it's taken over his cherished simulator and is doing weird things with it. And we'll find out what. It's done something that has alerted the agency. Well, what the hell is that? We don't know yet, but whatever it is, it's such a pain in the ass that apparently the supervisors and owners of this experiment, this simulator, and therefore Creo and his bosses are pissed off. Now, when I say that Creo up to now has been left alone, he's got this awesome simulator that you're going to learn about in a second, and he's a research scientist. So this simulator can really create anything real and imaginable. So, can you even imagine a better place to experiment? You can have this machine make anything that you want. Imagine a 3D printer that can create anything imaginable and anything real. And then you could tinker with it and see what happens. So, he gets these research requests from all over the place. And there's so many of them that he's realized it doesn't matter if he processes 1,000,000 requests a second or none. He does one every couple weeks. It's not going to make any difference. So, like the signal that came in, that you can't even describe it meaningfully in terms of space and time because it's everywhere all at once. Creel's requests for research are seemingly equally vast and endless. So he's just a lazy mofo. He just hangs out, knowing that it doesn't really make a difference whether he does 10 experiments today or one. They're all stacking up so quickly that it doesn't really make any difference. And then you've got the irritating adventurers and bon vivants who want to use the device not so much to experiment with stuff, but they want to create things because they're greedy. I mean, if the machine can make anything, imagine like a zillion carat diamond. I want that. Or, 700 something cubic meters of gold, or some rare element, or antimatter, or whatever. And that pisses them off too. They don't understand how it works. There's a sense of impermanence to what is being created. Because again, it's a simulation. It's as real as it can get, but it's not the real thing because it's generated second to second, or more accurately, instant to instant. And they arrive in this archaic contraption, which, if you're familiar with this, is actually a jukebox. Dyed bubbles and a dichloromethane flowing upwards, side columns glowing in different colors. That's an old school Wurlitzer jukebox. And if you're paying attention as a reader, this jukebox in a slightly different form is in Jonnie Fazoolie's apartment. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. There's Easter eggs like this throughout the book that tie back to Jonnie in weird ways, which makes you wonder what Jonnie's connection to all of this is or could be. So, as I mentioned, he's just strung up and out in his web. He's taking naps. He's not too worried about this. And then I go into describing the jar. And akin to Kim's camera and her photos and Borges Library, this is three-dimensional, and it's material in the sense of creating things of any and every possibility within the volume of the jar. And I hope that provides context to this. And then I describe in more detail what this actually means. Ready? Accessible within his jar is everything that has ever happened in every universe, is happening now, will ever happen, and could ever happen, even the things that didn't and couldn't. Every life ever lived, every life that will be lived, and every life that could ever be lived, spontaneously generated, one Planck second to the next, vanishing the instant the scintillations stop. The jar, in that sense, doesn't merely simulate or even render, but instantiates all of manifest reality by processing the quantum states that make any experience real within the bounded cylinder. Imagine a sentient pousse café, hearing the color turquoise while swinging a highlight cesta that contains a golden hologram of time moving backwards in Manhattan. Creo's jar can generate it. But the fun doesn't stop there. The number of ways to organize and analyze these instantiates is far greater than the mind-boggling total number of real and imagined objects themselves. So the computational burden is not only in generating these frames, moment to moment, but in creating continuity between these slices of Planck time, recording, then storing them. No wonder the north polar energy of a magnetar is consumed to calculate and generate the jar's instantiations, organize and store the inconceivably expansive yet demonstrable finite archive. And no wonder the line is long to schedule work on this legendary invention. And no surprise that Creo Banzai avoids their demands, forcing them all to wait. Everyone except Alice. So I'll jump in again. Given what I was describing in terms of the Borges Library and Kim's Library of Photos, now it all comes together, right? Where every possibility is in the jar, at least in potential. And as I was hinting at with Kim's photo collection, the real lift is not only in the photos themselves, however vast the collection, but in organizing them into little movies or big movies. And then, in this sense, storing what you found, learning from it, going back to it, in a sense, recording and analyzing and capturing all of reality within reality itself. Pretty cool. Now, when I describe the station, this is my fun science fiction-y stuff. A magnetar is really a spinning neutron star that's gushing electromagnetic radiation at the North and South Pole. Now, a certain percentage of collapsed stars exhibit this behavior, not all of them. Currently, we don't know why they do this. But imagine the burned out cinder, if you will, of a dying star that's collapsed in on itself, spinning as much as several hundred times a second, and only about, 20 miles across? Maybe 25 miles across. So imagine a ball of nuclear matter, only 20 to 25 miles across, not thousands of miles, folks, 20 to 20 miles across, spinning 50, 100 times a second, blasting unbelievable amounts of electromagnetic energy from their north and south pole. Now, this device, this jar, is in a space station that gathers the energy from this spinning cinder of a star, this magnetar, to power the computers needed for these simulations, these instantiations in Creo's jar. And the reason it needs that kind of energy is because we're dealing with these astronomically large numbers in terms of the calculations that need to be made within the jar And then, as I'm alluding to, recording and analyzing and storing these slivers of reality for study and archiving later. Now we're first introduced to Alice. So Creo here ignores these thousands, millions, billions of scientists across the infiniverse who are asking him to check stuff out with his miracle simulator here. And he's able to take his sweet time, except Alice won't let him. And presumably Alice is the one who sent the signal. Contained within the signal is this virus that has gummed the works. And the spider, Creo, is pissed off. That's what he calls her, Alice Void, because she generated from nothing and hacked his jar only to become an instant and enormous pain in Bonsai's terminal anal tubercle. The arachnid genius has so far been able to crawl under the agency's radar and spin his web until being caught in his own jar thanks to Alice here and her childish but high-stakes game. For years, Creo has thwarted incursions from terrorist attacks to crafty cons, but has never endured a hack of this scale. Watching Alice's loop repeat and repeat, he's unable to break back inside. Superstitious despite his math and engineering talent, Creo sees Alice's message as a sign. A failed romance inspired his creation of the jar, and Alice's unrequited love brings his life full circle. Pundits and priests throughout the infiniverse consider the jar omniscient and holy. If all secrets reside within it, then love's mystery must also be caught inside too. Creo uses it as a guide. Life is unfair and lovers are imperfect. Dreaming his entire life of being able to combine the best characteristics of those he's loved into an elusive soulmate, the jar has given him a chance. If the jar can generate everything possible and anything imaginable, then within it must reside his true love. But how can he find her, that special someone, hidden amid the multitudes? Of course, Creo has tried, only to roll into a ball and flee from the chimera. Physically real only inside the jar, objects delete the instant its code changes or halts, unable to exist outside of it. So Bonsai lives with the agony of having finally found his ideal lover, seen her and interacted with her solely through the walls of his jar, yet has never been able to touch her and cherish her. Taunting and tantalizing, she crawled before him, her hardened cephalothorax and pliable episothema enticing him, her venom-injecting fangs and dazzling spinnerets driving him nuts. A pastiche of his lover's best attributes, she teases Creo with her optimally blended viciousness and voluptuousness, push and pull. Bonsai generates and adores her, only to watch her vanish. His 8-legged programmed prompts generate sensuous and enthralling vignettes of her adoring and exciting him, Yet they are as fleeting and vexatious as the lovers she is modeled on. Perverse to think that the jar has now summoned Alice instead, her love directed elsewhere. Absurd and terrifying to realize that the fate of the entire Infiniverse rests with a heartbroken vixen. Nature's beauty knows no bounds. Bonsai seeing complexity within complexity at every level of existence, from quantum foam to galactic supercluster to great wall to ancient filament. The entire universe lurking as programmable potential within the jar's tiny volume surprises even him. All existence can be reproduced, yet it remains mysterious, especially its inhabitants. Now, what's going on here? Well, you've got this hologram, this thing that has appeared in Creo's jar. It seems to be generated by the message. So, this message that came in from everywhere and nowhere hacked his jar. His jar programs things, simulates things, creates things within it. And this message hijacked the computers with a virus and recoded the jar to make Alice appear. And here we get to know that Creo is an anthropomorphized spider. He's an arachnid genius. So his idea of what's sexy and lovable and the perfect companion is a little bit distant from what ours might be, with snapping mandibles and the like. But he's in the past created his perfect lover because he could create anything. And what he came to realize was that his perfect lover was there, but he couldn't embrace her. He couldn't live with her, touch her, mate with her, because this perfect lover was just a creation of his device. Within the walls of the jar, the thing is real because the machine generates these constructs, much like the pixels are stimulated in Kim's camera from the light. So just like the image on Kim's camera isn't the real thing, but a representation, so the things, no matter how three-dimensional and dynamic within Creo's jar, are fleeting constructs, and this frustrates him. So he actually created and saw his perfect lover, but couldn't even touch her. And that drove Creo nuts by getting so close, yet remaining so far. And now Alice here, what the writer is hinting at, namely me to you, is that Creo's heart is broken. He found his true love but can't get her. And meanwhile, Alice here, based on whatever's going on, seems to be pining for her own love. And it's all really paradoxical, perverse, and annoying. That this virus that broke into his jar that could simulate anything has simulated the avatar of this person who is pining for someone else, just like Creo pined for his true love in the machine. On a whim, Creo once programmed the jar to create within itself another identical, proportionally smaller yet fully functional jar. Within that jar within a jar, he again summoned his true lover. Teasing him anew, his lover within a lover feigned ignorance, played coy as if meeting him for the first time. He tweaked the code, infusing memories within the construct within a construct. Continuity implied causality, yet the slices of Planck time retained no memory, defying him. That's when he realized he was fooling himself. Love terrified him. He wanted none of it. A coward, his vulnerabilities outweighed the inertial mass of the entire cosmos. Easier to flee and hide behind the most advanced simulator within the Infiniverse than to spark true, lasting love. Resigning himself to living a forlorn, lonely life has freed Creo Banzai of love's countless burdens, enabling him to concentrate on his great work, at least when he feels like doing it, until... So Creo, frustrated by all this, tried to short circuit his inability to connect with his true love by creating a jar within a jar, thinking that this construct within a construct could be more real or accessible, break the rules and embrace them. And all it did was remind him about the futility of love when we're always trying to force it, aren't we? We're always trying to get our lover to be whom they're not, even when otherwise we would think they're perfect. Less than an hour ago, Creo was minding his own business, doing his job, when a fairly standard but quirky research request was interrupted, halted, and superseded by an alien instantiation. Assigned to develop a search algorithm capable of finding a particular sentient being across the Infiniverse, he set the jar to generate identical copies of two generic beings when it crashed. One twin as the control, its co-twin's properties were tweaked to measure the minimal physical and emotional traits necessary to identify them through an index, ranking, and retrieval schemata. All systems were a go. The jar was steadily stripping the less fortunate variable twin of uniquely defining characteristics when the jar glitched and instantaneously reverted to random foam. A mesmerizing melody, akin to a child's lullaby, pitch shifted with deep delay and quivering tremolo, reverberated throughout the facility, an eerie siren song awaiting a defiant reply. The jar recalibrated. Suspended within it stood a 7-year-old girl. She wore a bright blue knee-length puffed sleeve dress with a pinafore, ankle strap shoes. She curtsied, gestured behind her. An entire universe loomed in her background, its observable radius spanning 100 billion light years. Filaments containing trillions of galaxies twinkled within the generator. Objects generated within the jar are physically real as those outside it, at least as long as the algorithms code the Planck pixels 0 or 1, and continuity is maintained frame to frame. Having hacked the jar, Alice became manifest, blurring the boundary between instantiation and reality. The girl curtsied again, Creo intently watching her. Was she watching him? I have the builder numbers, she smiled, polite and interested, earnest but awkward. Arms across her chest, she winked, and simple as deleting lines of code, the entire universe vanished. Creel thought about the life he'd lived, the lives he'd imagined living. He contemplated the worlds that existed before he was born, after he'd gone. In one wink, she had taken them all away. Creel couldn't believe it. Had she found and compiled the fabled emergence equations, fundamental operators that create and can therefore destroy infinite iterations of endless universes? Legend has it that these EEs not only exist, but mastery of them bequeaths limitless power on anyone who finds and figures out how to compile them. The search for them has gone on forever. Assumed to be infinite in number and variation, the equations themselves are speculated to have a lower boundary size and complexity, enabling their placement on an ancient smartphone. Every permutation of every programming language has been attempted, of course, and not a day goes by without Creo receiving millions of queries tinkering with their generations. The stakes, after all, couldn't be higher. Imagine possessing and controlling the logical, mathematical backbone of all manifest reality, both fuel and engine of total creation and destruction. His jar is as close as anything to doing that, but the physical objects coded inside it are transitory instantiations, while Alice claimed dominion over the essential operators, then proved it. Solve my riddles, she commanded, confident as an omnipotent deity, bratty as a child, and deliver my joy, or be gone. She diffused back into Creo's probability matrix and looped again. What riddles? What joy? Bonsai has been unable to extricate the virus, but has analyzed it in part, marveled at its compact size and emergent complexity. Hence, she has cracked reality's code. Okay, so lazy ass Creo was just snoozing away in his hammock of a web above the jar, occasionally creeping down, running some experiments. Just another day on the farm here, another day in the web. And he gets one of the trillions or quadrillions of queries from scientists throughout the infiniverse. And the experiment that he's conducting is to see how he could differentiate two identical beings in the least problematic or complex way. So you have two people, let's say, and they're identical. Imagine two twins. So he starts with them identical in every imaginable way. They're copies of each other, down to, remember, the Planck level. Not only every atom, but every sliver of reality is the same between these two people. And then one is the control and the other is the variable. So he leaves the control alone, and then he starts messing with the existence of the other twin. And the question that the research scientist was apparently asking was, how much does he need to tweak this other twin so that the difference becomes measurably noticeable? Now, that's a symbol for a number of things and a bit of a premonition for stuff that comes later in the series. But suffice to say that that's the kind of experiment you'd expect the jar to do. It compares two things, and then it tweaks the one in ways that only the jar can tweak. And so he's futzing around with this experiment, and all of a sudden, like the white noise on a TV set when you lose the signal, his precious jar, the twins within the jar vanish. And they're replaced by the foam or the noise of random fluctuations of all those Planck pixels. In a sense, it's rebooting the jar. And then the virus takes over. And within the jar appears what looks like an avatar of Tenniel's Adventures in Wonderland. And I describe this not like the Disney character for copyright reasons too, but also because the Tenniel illustration is the original manifestation of this character, and I think is public domain at this point. Anyway, it's Alice from Wonderland is the avatar. And I know that that's the ultimate cliche of a trite kind of reference point. But for that very reason, I love it, because Alice is instantly identifiable, and Alice captures this whimsy and this idea that this all-powerful whatever appears in the guise of a 7-year-old girl. I love it. And this little paragraph here, a mesmerizing melody akin to a child's lullaby, pitch shifted with deep delay and quivering tremolo, reverberated throughout the facility, an eerie siren song, awaiting a defiant reply. I'm a fan of electronic dance music, and there's a song called Year Zero, which has been mixed and remixed, that has this kind of pitch shifted lullaby, kind of childish chirping sing along sound. And when I first heard it while I was exercising, it mesmerized me. And I kept hearing it in my mind's eye or ear as I wrote this. And I actually put it into the narrative at 2 points in the book. And I actually cite the specific remix. And it doesn't have lyrics. So again, from a copyright point of view, I don't think I'm being violative. But there's the Adam Ellis kind of heavy hip hoppy rock beat remix, and then there's the Electric Light remix or so, and I'm thinking that this kind of tune would make for an awesome soundtrack if this ever becomes a movie or miniseries or whatever. But that was on my mind, and to me, that's Alice. That's her transmission, her quantum signal. And throughout the book, that is the kind of clarion call of Alice appearing in the narrative. And I repeat this paragraph with only the minor variation of where the signal is being heard. And that's the announcement, like a Wagnerian kind of melody introducing the character over and over again throughout the narrative. And that sound appears, it's the signal, and there's Alice, and she is stating her demands. She says, I have the builder numbers. And what the hell are those? Well, Creo speculates they're what I have deemed the emergency equations, and they allegedly give their holder limitless power over all of reality. So, what the hell does that mean? Well, this is worthy of an entire podcast in and of itself for background, but suffice to say that there's a philosophical and kind of speculative or proto-scientific idea that reality as we know it isn't physical, but it's more like mathematics. That mathematical equations are the most accurate way we found of describing physical reality. And the more fundamental our descriptions of reality, the more mathematics we use. And if you extrapolate that further, then the backbone of reality itself might just be mathematical. So I roll with that as the underlying construct of this infiniverse. The infiniverse ultimately is nothing like how we perceive our universe. It's more like a video game, and I did another podcast where I bloviate on that. But our universe has no absolute space and time, and it's more akin to a software program running on an Xbox, and our awareness of the world is more like looking at that two-dimensional monitor, which actually is software running through an integrated circuit, lines of code that translate to pixels firing on the surface of that screen. And then we're acting as a kind of emergent interface between the two, moving the little controller, moving our little guy, which is us, through the perception of reality. But our reality is as far removed from what the real reality is as the image on that computer monitor is from the spinning disk and integrated processor of the Xbox. That's a pretty good analogy. So that's what I'm rolling with here. What Alice has done, whomever Alice is, we're seeing obviously an avatar as like a hologram that's created within Creo's jar that has been hacked by this creature's ubiquitous and instantaneous quantum signal. What Alice, quote unquote, Alice apparently has are these equations that control all of reality. So here's the premise. If all of reality ultimately is mathematical or something akin to mathematics in its essence, then if you could have the mathematical or something similar operators that control the mathematics, then you are controlling reality itself. It gives you unbelievable power over not just one universe, but every universe, because all of reality is fundamentally mathematical in its foundation. So this creature, in a sense, has broadcast a signal, and that signal has hacked into the spider's simulator, and she has created herself within the spider's simulator, through which she is laying out her demands. And she begins by saying, I have the builder numbers. And what that means, which the spider immediately intimates, she's saying, I have the emergence equations. I have gotten and have figured out how to use the fundamental mathematical foundation of reality itself. Now, science fiction stories, as I mentioned earlier in this pod, tend to be very, very pedestrian. You've got aliens like the three body problem. You have the Earth is about to be invaded by a nearby alien advanced civilization. So everyone's shitting their pants because they're on their way. And for some unknown reason, they reveal their plan, and then somehow they're controlling people from light years away, and they introduce string theory and entanglement and all this stuff, and booyah. Okay, well, it's a huge hit. I saw an episode or two on Netflix, and I liked the artwork and production. Frankly, I wasn't the biggest fan of the story, just because, I hate string theory, which becomes evident later in even my own book. And the stakes just seem to be trite to me. Once again, you've got the oldest trope in the science fiction archive, which is the alien invasion. Well, I'm introducing Alice from fucking Wonderland, so who am I to complain, right? But anyway, my penis did not get hard with the three body problem, because here we go again with aliens taking over the Earth. For my book, we're talking about taking over all of reality itself. And that's what I wanted to capture here. These builder numbers are the foundational control of reality itself. So I went all the way, baby. We're not talking about, just taking over the galaxy like Luke Skywalker and his dad, Darth Vader. And we're not even talking about a universe. We're talking about the infiniverse, the multiverse, all of reality, which can be basically kidnapped by having these equations. That's what this is all about. So that's why the spider is like WTF. And that's apparently how Alice is able to literally delete an entire universe lurking behind her as a demonstration that she actually has what she calls the builder numbers, which are, in more sophisticated parlance, the emergence equations. And I hint that they might even be able to be captured on a smartphone. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink for later in the series. So you have our fearless heroes who are going to, spoiler alert, try to put a stop to this madness. And part of the way that they can do it is either by finding this bad guy whose avatar is Tenniel's Alice from Lewis Carroll's Wonderland, or get a hold of these equations to zap her right back. So I'm setting up the grand plot here through foreshadowing, and I'm doing it in kind of an oblique way, but there's method to my madness. None of this is arbitrary. It's not like, gee whiz, there's these equations, and gee whiz, there's a mathematical foundation for reality, but that's the hook of the entire science fiction series itself. And then this Alice zapped a universe to prove that she's got them. And you better listen and you better do as you're told. And what does she ask them to do? Well, the narrative continues. Solve my riddles, she commanded, confident as an omnipotent deity, bratty as a child, and deliver my joy or be gone. And she vanishes. And then Creon wonders, what riddles? What joy? Banzai has been unable to extricate the virus, but has analyzed it in part, marveled at its compact size and emergent complexity. Hence, she has cracked reality's code. She's got these magical numbers through which she can control everything. Now, that's also a trope, like the Avengers, right? Like the reality stones. Yeah, it's the same shit. So, you could slap me around for complaining about the three body problem while I'm tapping into a cliche as big as the reality stones of the Avengers. But I think mine is more subtle than that because it isn't just a gem you rub, but this goes to a real philosophical idea. And I'll go into it in more detail elsewhere, but the Swedish scientist Max Tegmark has 7 levels of infinite reality or the multiverse. And in a nutshell, just to digress for a second, level 1 is our same universe. There's one universe, this one, and it goes forever. And like I was hinting at with Borges Library, if our universe goes forever, then sooner or later it runs out of combinations of stuff. It runs out of different books in Borges Library. It runs out of Kim's photographs. It runs out of Mookie's spider's jar instantiations, and then it repeats. So Tegmark's level 1 multiverse is an infinite universe we're in right now, and it just keeps cycling forever and ever. So the multiverse is repeating copies of the universes that are preceding it. The level 2 multiverse is that our universe isn't the only universe. And that is a jump that a lot of people can't even wrap their head around. But imagine, if you will, a balloon that's being blown up. And that's a universe. And then that balloon that's being blown up is in a bigger room within which other balloons are being blown up. So you need to extrapolate and think that there's a boundary to our universe. And outside of that boundary of our universe are other universes, presumably like ours, but they could be different in physical laws and all sorts of stuff. That's level 2. Level 3 is the many worlds interpretation of Everett, which is foundational to trying to understand quantum mechanics. The collapse of the wave function in quantum mechanics goes back to Schrodinger's cat, which is both alive and dead in the box. So you have a cat in a box. There's a radioactive isotope that could trigger poison being released in the box. Now, if the radioactive isotope decays, then it triggers a mechanism that breaks the poison and kills the cat. If the radioactive isotope does not decay, then the poison is not released and the cat's alive. Now, the radioactive isotope is a quantum object. It's literally an atom that either decays or doesn't. That is determined by measuring it, which is akin to a collapse of a wave function. Now, in just general speak, what that means is, according to the Everett many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, that at the instant that the isotope decays, the universe splits in two. That's the theory, seriously. That the universe splits so that there's a universe where the isotope actually decays and the cat is dead. And then there's another universe in parallel to it where the isotope does not decay and the cat is alive. Now, what Tegmark does is, you could have level 1 or level 2, I'm guessing, because this is, again, subject to a little bit of subjectivity and interpretation and creativity. You're modeling universes or possibilities. And then there's infinite branching. So you've got universes parallel to universes that are branching endlessly, kind of infinity within infinity for your mind being blown. And then one up even from that is where I'm at, which is what I was just describing, the level 4 multiverse. And the level 4 multiverse goes beyond all these three. And what it posits is that the fundamental backbone of all reality is akin to mathematics, operates like mathematics, and is the foundation of everything. So according to level 4, you could have a Platonic solid like this tetrahedron, and you can imagine it as actually a physical object, because Tegmark doesn't differentiate between our idea of a tetrahedron and a physical Platonic tetrahedron actually physically existing, because for Tegmark, there's no such thing as physical existence. It's all just math. Now, that sounds kind of wacky, but I like it. I like it for the reason that I was hinting at with regard to the video game. So if reality as we experience it is absolutely nothing like reality as it actually is, and it's more like this video game scenario, and the backbone of reality is more like an Xbox with computer software and the integrated circuit, then by this extension, my emergence equations you could kind of think as the software. Now, that begs the question of what the hardware is, and I'm going to explore that in later books too. But that's what Creo means by Alice figuring out how to compile the emergence equations. It's not just having the software. You could have software for, let's say, Call of Duty, which is just lines of code, which is equivalent to the emergence equations, dictating how you can create and destroy entire frickin' universes. But you need to compile them. In other words, you need the software to run on something. And Tegmark himself has trouble with that. Critics have pointed out that his software for reality needs something to run on. And Tegmark's answer to that is that the equations themselves kind of boot themselves up, which I think is plausible, but that's taking things to another level. And then you have like a genius such as Stephen Wolfram, who's the guy who developed Mathematica, and he had like a double PhD at age 20, and he wears tennis shoes and is kind of an egghead. I actually uh, give a character in my novel the name Fulcrum as kind of a hat tip to Wolfram. That's a different part of the book, and I'll dedicate a podcast to that too, because there's a lot going on there as well. But the reason I bring up Wolfram now is he has an idea called a hypergraph, and I love it. I think it's really cool. So there is no such thing as absolute space and time, and there's no such thing even as Einstein's curved space-time. That's not fundamental. What's the backbone of reality is what Wolfram calls a hypergraph, and it's basically points in space that have causal relationships to each other. And if you like that model, which I do, then my emergence equations are the operators by which these causal nodes interact with each other to create universes and things. So I know this is a digression, but I think it's essential to really understanding what I'm intimating here, which is you've got the bad guy in my novel, and she introduces herself through the spider's jar. And she makes a demand. She wants someone brought to her. You don't know who that is. And she threatens whomever's on the receiving end of this message, if you don't bring me this person, I'm going to keep deleting entire universes. Not like blowing up a planet with the Death Star, but entire universes are going to instantaneously bite the dust because I have the fundamental mathematical operators of the hypergraph, if you will. I have the mechanism by which things come into and out of existence. I can control it, and I am ransoming reality itself. You solve my riddles, do what I say, or entire universes are going to vanish from your infiniverse. And this is like a big deal. Her quantum transmission, back to the book, sounds like a silly jingle or a child's lullaby. Embedded within it lurks an enormous polynomial containing millions of terms. Creo never thought possible. Alice's jingle also contains within it the decryption algorithms to hack his jar, coding for her instantiated ransom message, and spyware, no doubt, eavesdropping on the jar's vast archives. Even more astounding than the Megapoly equation is the signal's infiltration of his jar's software, manipulating its Planck pixels to compile the child destroyer, now threatening all of existence. I have the builder numbers, she smiles again. Arms across her chest, she winks again. Yet another universe vanishes. Same one? Different one? Simulated or actual? What's the difference? His cherished jar has finally succumbed to a viral hack. Creo wonders if he'll ever regain access, get another chance to summon his true love. He senses the worst has yet to come. The word is out. Whoever sent this viral transmission displays significant mathematical and technological superiority and has demonstrated their power through the math of the message itself. At some point, Alice must have gained access to the garden, too, traveling through Hilbert space and complex time, at least to the extent of gaining an understanding of the vastness she threatens. The garden connects the infiniverse. Each step forward along its infinitely branching paths collapses the universal wave function at that point, sending the Voyager into another related universe. Access to and exploration within the garden is strictly controlled by the agency, one of the bureaucracy's prime directives. To walk the garden is even more violative than hacking the jar. So, what's going on with that? Well, Alice has gained control of these emergence equations. She has what she calls the builder numbers. And she's also been able to haul ass between universes, it seems. And she does so by what I call walking the garden. Remember, I was just talking about the collapse of the wave function and Everett's many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Implicit within Tegmark's level 4 is, I would imagine, level 3. So they're not mutually contradictory. If reality is math and math is reality, then the collapse of the wave function is Schrodinger's equation. And the measurement problem is basically resolved by what I call walking the garden. At every collapse of the wave function, what I call the universal wave function, at that point, the universe branches. And in later books, I'm going to describe walking through this garden. And later in this novel, you're going to see entire armies walking the garden to do battle. So, walking the garden is my science fiction way of jumping universes. And in this sense, and I'm going to refer to it later, walking the garden is akin to using the transfinite reality engine. Jonnie's machine to jump universes is an incredibly crude way. It's kind of like a Ford Model T compared to a SpaceX rocket, where the SpaceX rocket is walking the garden and Jonnie's machine is doing the same thing, is jumping. So you jump universes by walking the infinite branching pathways in the garden, or you could do it the hard old-fashioned way by using Jonnie and Casey's transfinite reality engine. So if you want to get from here to there in the Infiniverse, there's different ways to do it. And any way you do it is by using a kind of transfinite reality engine. And there's going to be an antique car, a 58 Thunderbird, that Jonnie's going to dream that's going to be a foreshadowing and a premonition of yet another kind of reality engine. And I think that's badass. It's like, it's a concept, it's a way of traveling through this infiniverse, and there are multiple ways to do it. The garden is one of them, and Alice, whomever Alice is familiar with that kind of transport, and that makes her even more formidable. And I hint here too that this is going to be significant later when it gets a little bit out of hand with a new version. A spoiler alert: there's an advanced version of Jonnie's transfinite reality engine. It gets stolen, and then the person taking hops throughout the Infiniverse gets busted. And they get busted because you're not allowed to just jump universes. And that's one of the jobs of the agency, which is, I know, another science fiction cliche, but why the hell not? One of the agency's jobs is to monitor and maintain and control who's jumping universes. Because if you got a bunch of folks jumping universes, things can get really out of control pretty quick. And you're not allowed to jump universes. You're not allowed to just arbitrarily walk the garden. And you're not allowed to hack Creo's damn jar. And all of it is being perpetrated by this Alice being. He dreams of scurrying, this is Creo, into those branching topiary hedges of the garden, his alternating tetrapods set into motion, every step collapsing a wave function, propelling Creo into another possible universe. Fleeing into the garden is a cop-out, Creo disgusting himself for entertaining the temptation. Besides, he can never abandon his techno baby, coveted by the corporate creeps running the show. He awaits the arrival of the managing director with contempt and fear. Unheard of for an agency executive of that high a level to visit, let alone appear physically in real time. Bonsai frowns. The only thing he hates more than Mondays is his terrible lizard of a boss, Quartz Leibniz, who has taken keen personal interest. Of course, he visits today of all days, and Creo is still hung over. The managing director's mission is rare and secretive, therefore the juiciest of targets for his enemies, of which there exist many, and multi-dimensional ones at that. His bounty is astronomical. Civil war has raged across the Infiniverse, and Creo's wanted none of it. He even ignores agency protocols and selectively filters research queries just to irritate Quartz, whom he despises. Creo wonders if his imminent visit is seen by the Slices, warriors of the one in battle against the many. Perhaps they've already inserted their spearhead fleets, poised to rotate, then strike? Their two-dimensional warships are maneuvered to penetrate the most sophisticated defensives, once inside reshaping into three-dimensional polyhedra with the fortitude to do serious damage. Not that he would give them any heads up, mind you. He's way too busy for such petty politics. But if push comes to shove, Doc Bonsai spins his own web and weaves his own infinitales. So what's going on there? Well, you've got Bonsai who wants to get the hell out of there, and he fantasizes about entering the garden and vanishing. He just wants to disappear into another universe, and then he feels he's just being a chicken shit. He's got to stick around. And of course he's got to stick around because all of this mess is about his damn jar anyway. And then he comes to the realization, and he shares with us, that the corporate creeps running the show, namely the agency executives who ultimately are his boss, are actually headed toward the station for a visit. Unheard of for an agency executive that high a level to visit, let alone physically in real time. So once again, it's another science fiction trope, but if you're dealing with vast distances and relative time, and you're jumping universes, then this whole idea of actually being in the same physical space at the same time is quite exceptional. Like, it doesn't really make any sense. And then with the advanced technology, why would you do that? And you would do that only in crazy exceptional situations like this, where some being has hacked into your prized scientific experiment and then apparently has deleted a universe or universes and ransoms reality itself with the claim that they have these fabled emergence equations, are launching riddles and demanding that you bring someone to her. So this guy, Quartz Leibniz, is some high-ranking somebody. He's a managing director in this proverbial agency. Quartz hates his guts because he's his boss, tells him what to do, and he's likely an asshole. But this guy is on his way. So Bonsai hates Mondays. Why does he hate Mondays? He hates Mondays because he's hungover from the weekend, A. B, he hates Mondays because this creature has hacked into his jar. He has lost control of his prize science experiment because it's been hacked into by this creature. And this creature is busy deleting universes, apparently, and making demands. And even worse than that, just compounding Creo's headache, is his boss actually on his way to visit his cherished science experiment. The very last thing you want as a research scientist is for the head of your lab to come and inspect your shit. And that's exactly what's going on here in an exponentially more profound and powerful kind of way. And even worse than that, Creo knows that his boss is a target. There's some kind of civil war going on between what's called the one and the many. And apparently the bad guys here, the ones who want to take out his boss, which actually Creo would like that very much because he hates him so much, seems to be like these two-dimensional creatures who pierce defenses, roll into balls, and then attack. So as a reader, you're not quite sure what the actual F is going on here, but I try to tantalize and tease with this idea that as I mentioned, you have a recalcitrant, frustrated research scientist whose boss is on his way for a visit. You have his cherished experiment taken over by some alien entity. And then you've got this civil war going on, and you're tempted, with a hint that he might even be able to be doing it, of alerting the enemy that your boss is physically on his way. And let's see what happens next. I have the builder numbers, smiles Alice Void, polite and interested, earnest but awkward. Deleting universes despite his best efforts to pull the plug. Shut her down. At least shut her up. Solve my riddles, she commands, confident as an omnipotent deity, bratty as a child. She's looping, remember. And deliver my joy, or be gone. She diffuses back into his probability matrix and loops again. During his many idle hours, Creo sometimes marvels at the many implications of his own invention, most notably how it demonstrates the infinite yet bounded nature of reality itself. Since the jar can generate everything possible and imaginable, and since the total number of these iterations has a limit, the infiniverse runs out of possibilities, forcing eternal recurrence. So not only has everything already happened in every permutation, is happening now, and will forever happen in the future, but does so in endlessly repeating and variable cycles. On awful days like this one, he feels trapped, his head spinning, thinking in circles, looping like Alice, but within the biggest jar of all, the infiniverse itself. No wonder he's lazy. Why bother? Creo gazes at the main screen. The spinning magnetar blasting its pulse, caught by the station's reflectors, then converted into a beam powering the agency's most prized science experiment. In locked polar orbit near the energetic stellar husk, the 5-kilometer wide Omega 1 research station maintains standard gravity by rotating every 100 seconds, spinning at about 564 kilometers per hour. That often gives Creo a headache, adding to his irritability, further fueling his cynicism. He's the one who christened the station with such a remedial, contradictory, and arrogant name. His asshole boss will be arriving here soon, escorted by a task force of hypertroopers. And who can say which other agents of the agency? What a mess! And all because of this little girl. I never signed up for this shit, sighs Creo Bonsai, descending from his cobweb, scanning for errant code with his 8 beady, blinking eyes, tweaking the device controls with his 8 legs. I have the builder numbers, smiles Alice Void, polite and interested, earnest but awkward, deleting universes despite his best efforts to pull the plug. Shut her down, at least shut her up. Solve my riddles, she commands, confident as an omnipotent deity, bratty as a child, and deliver my joy or be gone. She diffuses back into his probability matrix and loops again. So I deliberately pulled forward and pushed back. Creo thinks about the amazingness of his jar, of his experiment, and then articulates the eternal recurrence idea that I brought up earlier in this podcast. He just vocalizes it. And then I link the idea of that universal circularity with his head spinning. And then I connected that with the space station he's in. Up to now, I haven't really described it. And it seems to be like this spherical or ring like structure spinning pretty fast. It's 5 kilometers wide. So it's pretty big, right? That's a big ass ring. And it's really hauling ass. So again, I did the little research here that in order to maintain the equivalent of one Earth gravity of centrifugal force, where you're walking on the outside of the ring, like you take a bucket of water and you fling it over your head and the water doesn't fall on you because the force of motion outward continues. And as Einstein demonstrated in his equivalence principle, there's literally no way to tell the difference between that force of circular motion and gravity. There's an equivalence going on. So the station is spinning. You saw this in Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And Creo's station is hauling ass at 300 miles an hour going around. And that gives him a headache. And he's irritable and he's cynical. So he's disoriented and he's pissed off. And then he realizes that, again, his boss is on his way. This Monday sucks. He's going to have a visitor, and he's not going to just have him. He's going to be escorted by the military. It's a military escort. And I'm hinting at here, they're hyper troopers. They're 4-dimensional military people. It's the Infiniverse. So just like you've got multiple universes, what's to preclude universes with 2-dimensional terrorists who are about to attack, or 4-dimensional military men who are there to protect the big cheese. I like drama. I like good guys and bad guys. When George Lucas saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, he loved the aesthetics of it. It looked gorgeous. He loved the enormous sound stages, the breathtaking grandeur of outer space, and the beauty of advanced technology. But he was kind of bored. He wanted laser battles and good guys and bad guys. And that's when he thought up Star Wars. He wanted to make Star Wars. He wanted to make Stanley Kubrick's 2000 Space Odyssey with cowboys and Indians and laser battles and gunfights. And I kind of like that too. If you're talking about the Infiniverse, why just have people in rooms talking? Have two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and four-dimensional mofos duking it out. Space battles and civil war. So hang on to your hats. I'm hinting at all of this. The Spider's asshole boss, who's the head of the agency, who's physically on his way to visit, is being escorted by the military. And I'm going to introduce all sorts of fun stuff. It's like MacArthur versus Truman, Agamemnon versus the great warriors of Greece. I'm dialing it up. This is going to be fun. And you're actually going to get a taste of this later in the book where they actually duke it out. The hyper troopers are on their way with Creo's boss. So it's going to get hot, and Creo is not having it. And if you thought I was hinting that this guy is like a big humanoid spider. He is. He's got 8 legs, eight, eight, eight appendages, and 8 eyes, and he's all weird looking, right? I imagine him kind of like a Japanese animation. Like there was a spider in the movie Spirited Away who was like really lanky and tall and kind of creepy. And maybe I had that in mind when I'm thinking of Creole Banzai. The spider in Spirited Away, or maybe something similar to that. Put him in a suit, like a space suit, a research scientist outfit. I have the builder numbers, smiles Alex. So again, it's a repeating loop. Why? Why is Alice repeating? Why doesn't she finish her damn message? Because she's waiting for the big cheese to arrive. Her message, the one who can fulfill Alice's ransom and solve the riddle, isn't the spider. It's looping because she's waiting. She knows what they're going to do. She knows that the big cheese is coming with the big guns. And Creo is pissed off. I never signed up for this shit. He just wants to be left alone. And why is it Monday? Why did all this happen on a Monday? And to me, that's just really funny. And it's kind of Douglas Adamsy, where you got all this exotic science fiction shit going on. And at the end of the day, it's just so banal as waking up and having all this horrible shit happen to you on a Monday of all days. And it's only gonna get worse. And then you got Alice, solve my riddles, looping like a tease over and over again. So that's the jar. And I think I cranked this for 2 hours talking about how I thought of the jar, what the jar is, and how it more or less fits into the narrative. So if you made it this far, I appreciate you. And I love this opportunity to bloviate about my own book. And if you've observed nothing else, then clearly I've thought through this shit. This book is really my pride and joy, which is years of thinking about a lot of abstract stuff, learning how to write, and learning how to communicate all this in a way where I think I'm like walking that tightrope between revealing enough so you more or less know what's going on, but not so much that it becomes just an expositional jerk off of geeky science concepts. It's not just like here's an idea, the end. It's an integrated part of the narrative. And again, unlike Borges Library, which is really just a concept, I've got real characters with real connection, real concerns that reflect things that humans can relate to, and they're all going to start interacting with each other. And frankly, as I was writing this, they took on a life of their own. So more to come. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this process at least a tenth as much as I do, exponentially so, because I'm having a blast. And there's nothing like bloviating about bloviating. This is a meta bloviation, and I'm all ears for any kind of feedback. And I can't wait to tell you about the other parts of the book. Like, comment, share. Thank you for listening to the Bald and Bloviating Podcast.